Still on the demise of Kofi Annan, he was the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations and the first black African to take up the role for almost 10 years. Annan, who was also awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2001, presided over some of the most turbulent periods for the world body, but his moral prestige remained largely undented, having negotiated with most of the world leaders across continents. NTV's Myendo paints the portrait of Annan, the peacemaker.
The peace negotiations led by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan between retired President Mwai Kibaki and NASA leader Raila Odinga were done at the Serena Hotel, which is on my left, to be precise, the Amani Room. Now, at the time, Kofi Annan left Serena Hotel and walked all the way to Harambee House, where the agreement between the two leaders was made. This was just one of the many peace initiatives led by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan.
A peacekeeper, a diplomat-in-chief and a global statesman, Kofi Annan was perhaps a man of peace in a world of war.
We have reason to be worried about the state of the world. Honestly speaking, we are in a mess. The only way to resolve this conflict is to get the international community, the Permanent Five, working with the regional powers as well as the Syrian parties, to find a solution. If we can work out a common framework where we all work along the same lines to implement it, we stand a chance.
This is the picture of a man who rose from a schoolboy in Ghana to world statesman and Nobel Peace Prize winner. In his memoir, Interventions, A Life in War and Peace, Annan recognized the cost of taking on the world's top diplomatic job, joking that SG for Secretary General also signified scapegoat around UN headquarters. Annan has been described as a pragmatic leader who almost religiously adhered to the spirit of the UN Charter during his stint as the chief functionary of the World Organization. But his first splash of the global news headlines was in 1990 when he persuaded Saddam Hussein to allow the repatriation of over 500,000 Kuwaiti workers who had been trapped there after the Iraqi invasion. Before then, he had spent most of his time pushing paper as a budget specialist in the UN. But under his watch as the Under-Secretary General in charge of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations at the UN, there was a spectacular rise in peacekeeping missions in the UN history. In 1998, he helped ease a transition to civilian rule in Nigeria and visited Iraq to try to resolve its impasse with the Security Council over compliance with weapons inspection and other matters. The effort helped avoid an outbreak of hostilities that seemed imminent at the time. The blot in his legacy would, however, come with the slaughter of approximately 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus in Rwanda when he was the UN peacekeeping chief. For him, it drove home the UN institutional weaknesses. He has also been criticized for his handling of the Bosnia massacre of 1995. In 2005, Annan succeeded in establishing the Peace Building Commission and the Human Rights Council. But that year, the UN was facing attacks over allegation of corruption. As special envoy to Syria in 2012, Annan won international backing for a 6-point peace plan. The UN deployed a 300-member observer force to monitor a ceasefire, but there was no peace and Annan was unable to surmount the bitter stalemate among Security Council powers. He joined an elite group of former leaders founded by the late Nelson Mandela, eventually succeeding Desmond Tutu as its chairman after the failed interlude trying to resolve Syria's rising civil war. Myendo, NTV.